Hey guys, welcome to Tales from a Retro Gamer, episode number 18. Once again, we have my nephew Chris Davis here from Japan. Thank you so much for flying all the way in from Japan just to be on the show. I really appreciate it.
Not a problem. It only cost me about $1,600. So.
Now, Chris and I, as Chris grew up, Chris was born in 81, I was born in 67, so when he came along, as he grew older, we played a lot of video games together. I was the cool uncle, right? I was the cool uncle or just the nerdy uncle? Maybe a little of both.
Yes and yes.
Yes. We played a lot of video games when you were growing up. Now,
right.
As a matter of fact, it kind of leaked into your school life. You wrote a paper about this one time when you were very, very young. My mom found this, and I'm going to read it for you real quick.
Oh, thank you.
You'll be able to see it on the screen, but I'm going to read it real quick. It's called. It has the very imaginative title, "The Relatives Came." One day, my grandparents came with my Uncle Brett. Me and Brett played Nintendo and watched a movie about unicorns and demons. After that, my dad and me had a contest on the Nintendo, and Brett would play the winner. See, I was just generous that way. I would let you guys play first, and I would play the winner.
So not only did you introduce me to video games, but also unicorns and demons. So I think there's a lot to.
That was a pretty good influence,
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So now, last episode we talked a lot about Atari, ColecoVision, Commodore 64. Now we're up to the NES era.
Right.
Now, what are your memories of the NES?
Okay, so my earliest memories of the NES are, as we talked about last episode, when you were living at your parents' and you had your room in the back, your video game system set up. My earliest memories of NES are playing with you and my dad in the back room, avoiding social engagement, Thanksgiving, Christmas, all the major holidays.
We'd be in the main rooms long enough to eat and say hello.
Absolutely.
Maybe watch a little Cowboys football on Thanksgiving.
Absolutely.
But other than that...
And if it was just me and you, I'd have been playing nonstop. But my dad, of course, was...
Yeah, he liked to play too.
He absolutely did.
Yeah.
So I remember, there was the classics, Castlevania, Ikari Warriors, Contra.
You remember in particular an Ikari Warriors incident.
Oh, I do.
The great Ikari Warriors incident of 1987 or something.
Something like that, yeah. So you and my dad, and it was very frustrating for me because y'all would just play Ikari Warriors and it was just non-stop.
It was a long game.
Yeah. They're going up the screen as it works in that game and
throwing grenades and shooting.
Absolutely. And I'm sitting there watching, and
it was a lot more fun playing than watching.
Yeah, I'm gonna assume. Not that I ever got to play. I didn't get to play on the co-op sort of simultaneous games back then because I was too young and I was kind of a drag, right?
Well, in Contra in particular, so I got really good at Contra before we knew about the Konami code, where you could get 30 lives. And I played Contra so much, I actually beat it
without up, down, and the rest of it.
Yeah, with your regular amount of lives.
Yeah.
I finally, dancing in between the bullets, and I got so good. It was almost like an art form. It was like watching a maestro at work or something like that.
You were absolutely, tickled the keys.
Right. So
two-button controller.
The control pad was my instrument.
The control pad, yeah.
So, but anyway, in Ikari Warriors...
Getting back to Ikari Warriors, y'all had gotten very far, and I'm sort of bored. I'm half asleep.
It took a couple of hours at least.
And then y'all are basically, at some point, y'all kind of... No, and you're losing your cool and look up and I don't know how to describe it, but you'd gone up into a little
like a corner with a wall.
Yeah, a corner with a wall, and the screen had moved up so that you were sort of cut off, and it was a dead end.
Yeah,
and you couldn't go back
and
around.
That was me, and then Mike tried to come down with his character, and the edges, but there was no going back.
Yeah, and
I was stuck.
Right.
And I couldn't kill myself. There was no way to.
Right.
You couldn't grenade yourself or anything.
Absolutely.
At that point.
So there was no.
And so we just had to reset.
And I think y'all. At that point, how long had y'all been playing? For a couple of hours.
At least a couple.
2 or 3 hours.
Yeah, it was
absolutely
long, crazy game.
So yeah,
that was one thing that was cool about the NES. Some of these games were adventure, where you just went on and on and on.
Absolutely.
There were worlds and secrets and surprises, especially with a game like Super Mario Brothers.
Absolutely.
That was just mind-blowing compared to the stuff that came before it.
And no save features on those early long forms.
Yeah, no battery backup, no passwords.
Like that. So speaking of Super Mario Brothers, I guess that could get me to the second memory of NES, which was that my most memorable Christmas present, some years after the NES had first appeared on the scene. When was it released in the U.S. again?
It was test marketed in 85, and it was released in full in 86.
So it would have been a couple of years after that.
So you played it at my house first,
Absolutely.
And then you got your own.
Exactly.
Santa.
From Santa. Thank you, Santa. And of course, Super Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt were included in the package.
And you
absolutely.
Got the gun with
the light gun. Yeah. Absolutely. And loved playing Duck Hunt. That dog would go after the duck.
Did you ever try to shoot the dog?
All the time.
Now, in the arcade version, you could actually shoot the dog.
Right, but the home version was a little bit toned down for family friendliness.
Yeah, Nintendo policies and stuff.
Yeah. These days they'd be blaming a rash of dog shootings on Duck Hunt or something.
Right.
No doubt.
So what other games do you remember?
Yeah,
from
well, Super Mario Brothers, that was a big one. So at my own
kept
house,
you busy hours,
it kept me
days
busy.
and days,
Absolutely. And me and my dad, actually, this is sort of a bonding thing for me and my dad. We not in 2-player mode, on 1 player, we played through Super Mario Brothers and beat it, and we would switch off different types of levels we were good at. So I was good at the fire. What was it? Bowser's castle levels,
shooting fire at you.
and the little fire things that would turn.
Oh yeah, the platforms that you couldn't jump on.
Absolutely, and I was better at those. And my dad was good at.
I guess they weren't platforms if you could jump on them.
They
They were more like fire.
They were platforms
that were fire.
That were fire.
They were fire.
They were fire.
Yeah.
And
fire.
my dad was better at the levels where you had to sort of use the what were the
bullet bill?
Bullet bills, and you'd have to kind of jump from bullet bill over to a platform.
Yeah.
So we kind of switched back and forth, and we managed to beat the game. No save function.
Very cool.
And yeah, absolutely. Those are some of my early memories. Yeah, the NES for sure.
Right.
Dragon Warrior was another big memory for me.
Yeah.
So this sort of last episode we talked a little bit about how I would watch my dad play Ultima and draw maps for it.
Yeah.
And then with E.T. on the Atari, I sort of tried to do this map drawing strategy. Dragon Warrior was the first real RPG that I experienced.
Dragon Warrior and Legend of Zelda were a lot Western kids. That was a lot of their first experience with RPGs in the U.S.
The JRPG.
Yeah,
right?
the JRPG.
Absolutely, and I think that was my first taste. And as we were discussing, at some point we'll talk about me going off to Japan. But I think that might have been my first taste of like the Japanese RPG gaming.
So that's what started it.
It must have been.
Right.
Absolutely. So Dragon Warrior. My dad was playing that as well, and I accidentally deleted his save game as he approached the end of the game.
Now, didn't him playing Dragon Warrior sort of interfere with...
Absolutely. So that was a Christmas present, Dragon Warrior, and him and his friend Kerry Gamble.
Yeah, very famous comic book artist. He's drawn Superman, Indiana Jones, Power Man and Iron Fist.
Right.
Lots of Marvel work.
Yeah, and
DC.
He had 2 sons at the time, roughly my age, one a bit older, one a bit younger. And at the same time, him and my dad both get
Now
Santa,
they knew each other from going to school together, right?
That's a good question. I mean, they were involved with some early...
Somewhere in Fort Worth, Texas.
They were involved with some horror-related, classic horror zines, theater.
Yeah, and they did makeup and all that stuff.
They had interviewed Rick Baker at one point for a zine.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. So, anyway, Santa bestowed Dragon Warrior onto both households for the children.
Right.
My dad and Carrie.
Yeah,
but both my dad and Carrie, we had to go to school in the day, and Carrie was just drawing comic book, supposed to be drawing pages.
He could set his own schedule.
Absolutely, and my dad was taking college classes, and that was the year my dad got his first, D, I think, and Carrie may have lost a book.
Yeah, Carrie lost I don't remember what title it was, but he lost a key writing assignment or a drawing assignment with Marvel Comics. His basic job.
Yeah, dream job.
Yeah, his dream job because Dragon Warrior was so absorbing, so time consuming.
Right, and this actually ties into Japan. After I'd moved to Japan, it might have been my second year living in Japan, the cell phone company that I had a contract with, there were 2 main cell phone companies, and they each had a promotional game on their phones. One company had Final Fantasy, the original Final Fantasy. The other had Dragon Warrior. My company had Dragon Warrior. It was on my phone. Got sick, stayed home from work, and I was playing Dragon Warrior. At the time there was no internet really, so I called my mom. I told her, "Oh, you remember that game Dragon Warrior? Yeah, it's on my cell phone now." She said, "Oh, well, be careful."
Be careful.
Be careful.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely.
Don't play in the traffic and don't play Dragon Warrior.
Don't play Dragon Warrior. You could lose your jobs, fail your classes. Absolutely.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit more about Japan in a little bit. Now, so with the NES, then after that, your sister got a games console of her very own.
Absolutely. So, I mean, my sister, at some point after that, the Genesis. She got a Sega Genesis, and,
That probably would have been 91 or 92, because she had Sonic on it.
That's right. So she had Sonic on it. The other games I remember, she really liked to play The Little Mermaid.
It was probably 92 or 93.
Somewhere around there.
Anyway, so
very
she liked
early
The Little
90s.
Mermaid.
Yeah, and we would both play Aladdin.
She beat The Little Mermaid. I remember she was proud
of that. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe so. I did, anyway.
You beat it.
I'm a big fan of Little Mermaid. The movie, the character, you name it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but we'll talk about that another time.
Or not.
Or not. Right. So you were slightly jealous that she got a Genesis because it was a step well above the NES.
Absolutely, and you'll recall the Genesis was always the case that the Genesis was the more mature,
the cool system,
the less censored system. There was, you could have blood,
right? And Sega does what Nintendo don't. They had the marketing ads, Mortal Kombat, and
absolutely.
All that. Yeah.
So my sister got the
games
hardcore
were faster
game
and edgier.
That's right.
And they tried to make it out like a lot of kids that had the Sega would say, Sonic was so much cooler than Mario and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely, and
and he was edgier. When you'd go too long without playing the game, he would kind of look at you,
that's
want
right.
you to play
he would
and stuff.
Sort of like tap his foot in frustration.
A little edgy.
That's right. And of course, my sister used it to play Little Mermaid.
Yeah. Right, but it was cool.
Anyway.
And so, and I had a Genesis. I got my Genesis after the first. I rarely got a system immediately. The Nintendo Wii is about the only one where I bought one just right out of the gate.
Right.
Just a couple of weeks after it came out. Because I would always wait for a price break. And I got my Genesis after it had gone down to like $150 or something like that.
Right.
Anyway, so speaking of the Genesis.
Yes.
You once told me, so we were talking about my dad who passed away a few years ago. We were talking about him and how, and I was telling you, as much as I was into gaming, my dad never played a single video game.
Right.
Me and him would, a few times I remember shooting pool with him a couple times, and and I know he's played pinball. He grew up in the 50s. He does have a little bit of geek cred. He was the only kid in his school with a car, and he actually saw Forbidden Planet in 1956 at the drive-in movies with a date. So cool geek cred.
That's actually
And him and my mom saw Attack of the 50-Foot Woman at the theaters, at the drive-in, on their honeymoon.
Wow, props to Papa.
Yeah, so he's he's got a little geek cred in his background. But
Outer Limits fan.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Twilight Zone, we'd watch that. He liked Wonder Woman and the Hulk. So I did some cool stuff with my dad. We played sports a lot together, but he had zero interest or acknowledgement of video games, or so I thought. So when I told you my dad had never played video games, you shocked me.
Well, so we've mentioned the room you had in your earlier room of doom in your parents' house, my grandparents. Yeah. And when you moved out, it was a real tragedy for me because what was I supposed to do now at family functions? Talk,
right?
Play basketball.
Yeah.
I don't know. So, but the video game system was gone. It was an empty room. But one weekend I don't know how old I was, but I went over to stay at their house.
Spend a couple of nights or whatever.
Spend the weekend, and I took the Sega Genesis with me. And
you took Kara's Sega over there.
Yeah, Kara's Sega.
Right.
And I think I had rented, because we had game rentals were still a thing back then, and I had rented from Blockbuster Video a copy of what's it called, T2, Terminator 2.
Well, I happen to have my complete copy right here, which I acquired later, because you probably rented cartridge only with no manual.
Cartridge only, no manual.
But it was pretty easy what to do in this game.
That's
you
right.
You got to cursor around and shoot.
That's right. There was a cursor, and you'd move it around and shoot, and these Terminators would come lunging at the screen.
And did you ask my dad to play it, or how did that?
Well, I was sitting there playing, and I'd set it up in that back room, and I think he might have come back in. I think I asked him. Yeah, I said, "Do you want to play, Papa?" And he said, "Well." And he walked back there, and
right.
I sort of told him, "Okay, you move this, and that little, that thing on the screen's gonna move around." And he played for a little while, maybe 10 minutes. And
well, you were, the golden grandchild,
I'm afraid, you were the third child.
Forgotten.
I was absolutely.
Right.
So he didn't play any games with you, but for me, he definitely played Terminator 2.
So I'll take it, right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so anyway, that's cool. That's neat. That's a neat story.
Yeah, it's a good memory.
So on and on. So I remember, at what point, so I had moved out, I had a roommate, and then, I worked and had the comic book store with your dad,
right.
and then I got married and all that stuff, and then sold my share of the business to your dad, then I started working at Walden Books and on and on. At what point in all that did you move to Japan, and why?
Right. So, during the era of Fantastic Comics and Cards,
which was the name of mine and his dad's comic book store, we had 2 locations.
Right. So I would spend, after school, I probably would have been a latchkey kid, but my dad didn't work at a normal job. He co-owned a comic book store with you. And so after school, I'd typically end up at the store.
Which you didn't mind.
I did not mind. My sister's another
She
story.
didn't care for it that
She
much.
did not care for it that much at all.
To kind of help her, I would let her help me take out the trash, and we'd make a game out of it.
Right.
I'd give her maybe some kids' comics to read, which kept her attention a little bit. But she really wasn't into it.
I was,
but
you I could just go through all the back issues.
Yeah.
And whatever was new on the stands, I could read in the back
And you
room.
were particularly interested in RPGs. You
Absolutely.
would read monster manuals and
So
stuff.
there was a couple of things that happened. First, my interest in video game RPGs. At the store, y'all had you carried RPGs and war games like Warhammer and miniatures. And one of the employees was into RPGs and Warhammer. And I asked my dad, well, what is this Dungeons and Dragons? And he told me, well, imagine like playing Dragon Warrior but without a console. Or TV, and
with your imagination.
I couldn't imagine what that.
Yeah.
So I had to get on that.
Right.
So that sort of was one thing. But the other thing that happened was I had been playing these games, Dragon Warrior, and I kind of knew that these games were from Japan. I knew that's where they came from. There were other sort of Voltron, other things in a kid that grew up in the 80s.
Speed Racer was my first
I see.
Experience with anything
Japanese cartoon. Mine was Voltron,
media.
probably.
Right.
Yeah. But in any case, right around in the early 90s, mid 90s, early 90s, manga and anime started to make inroads, right? And I sort of got interested in it that way. So video games, I started playing some Japanese games, was watching, interested in Japanese media.
So you got interested in the culture. And that led you to...
Yeah, so I went to University of Texas at Austin, and I studied Japanese.
Okay.
And I decided to study, and then I spent a year studying abroad, came back, finished up my degree, and at the same time, after that, I went back to Japan, worked for a year, and then I decided to become a linguist, which is what I do to pay the bills, and I sort of integrated that with my interest in Japanese language, and so on.
Yeah.
And I've been,
So your career path was directly influenced by video games and role-playing games.
Absolutely.
See, kids, they're good for you.
Well, so the video games led me to Japan. Role-playing games led me to the idea that all aspects of life can be turned into numbers and tables and dice rolls.
That explains a lot.
It does.
I'm starting to understand more about you.
We could talk about that on another episode.
Yeah, right. But by and large, I mean, so you've got a doctorate, I understand.
That's right. Yeah.
And you're a linguist and you're a college professor.
That's right. Believe it or not.
Right. So I think kind of fantasy and science fiction and RPGs and video games have had a pretty good influence on your life.
I mean, I might mention that Dragon Warrior, so it was my first JRPG. It sort of set me down the path of being interested in that Japan-oriented stuff. It's also, it helped me learn to read.
Yeah, right.
I was going back through some first, second grade notebooks. They would make us write stories at the beginning of the day, and mine consisted of, you encounter a slime.
Yeah, right.
You do 5 hit points of damage.
Yeah. Well, comic books, video games, and role-playing games have helped kids learn to read, and you're thinking, video games, really? In my Super Nintendo book, the SNES Omnibus Volume 1, a guy wrote a story about he didn't like reading because he didn't really care to. He didn't know why you should read. He was just didn't want, he needed to learn how, and he would try, they would try to teach him at school, his parents. He just didn't.
Right.
The effort, but there was a video game with cutscenes where you needed to read the dialogue to progress through the game, and it motivated him to read, and he learned to read playing a video game. So kind of cool.
Very cool. I actually learned part of how I learned to read Japanese was playing non-translated Japanese imports.
Okay.
Yeah,
very cool.
At a certain key point in my life.
Okay, so to wrap things up real quick, so you're in Japan now, you're in Okinawa.
That's right.
And you're not a huge part of the gaming culture over there, but
No.
have you ventured into Tokyo to do any game hunting, or?
So, I mean,
or do you play games with your friends at all?
So my friends over here, so this is not retro at all, but
that's okay.
It's going to be retro soon. PS4. So
Yeah.
my friends back home, it's a long distance. I'm on the other side of the world. My friends were all playing, multiplayer games on the PS4. So got a PS4. Been playing. So you can
kind of keep in touch with them, and you can talk to them.
Absolutely, with the headsets. That's been amazing. So you can keep in touch with the friends
really
while you shoot each other.
Yeah,
cooperate.
Yeah,
sometimes
talk a little, shoot a little.
Talk and shoot a little.
That's
Absolutely.
Awesome.
So I've been doing that. Early on when I was in Japan, though, when I first went there, that was my. I would go to the arcades, played Ghost and Goblins. There was a cabinet for Ghost and Goblins. Spent a lot of time playing that.
Yeah.
And the fighting, back then in the early 2000s, I was sort of still into Street Fighter and related games, and the way they would set the cabinets up there, instead of 2 people playing on the same screen side by side, you'd have your screen on this side and another screen on the other side
that you couldn't
and you
see.
Wouldn't see the person you were playing unless you walked around and looked at them. And you would sit down, and people would sit down, smoke, have a beer, and play. Maybe this was for the adult players, but so there were sort of interesting differences in the arcade culture that were pretty interesting.
All right, well, very cool. So I'm very glad are you going to be down for the holidays this year?
I'm planning to, yes.
All right, well, hopefully we can do maybe a Christmas-related episode, because there was one time where I came to spend Christmas with you and your grandparents and your dad, mom, my sister, because me and your dad had the comic book store, and we didn't have time. I didn't have time to travel with my parents to Arkansas like I usually did.
Right.
So I went with y'all to have Christmas, and I took a little trip down the road to 7-Eleven to just get away by myself from everything, because I had a great time, wonderful food and everything, but I had to get out a little bit.
Right.
And I discovered one of my favorite games at that 7-Eleven, but that's a tale for another time. And so for this episode, if you guys could comment below, speaking of my dad, your papa, playing a game with him, do you have any senior citizen related gaming stories? Please comment below. Have you been surprised by a senior citizen maybe being interested in a kind of an edgy game, like relatively speaking, like Demon Attack, or a hardcore game like that?
Right.
Has a senior citizen surprised you about being really good at a game or being a collector? And you had kind of a snarky comment.
Well, I mean,
now, when you come home, you play games.
That's right. I mean, there's a senior citizen sitting just to my right who's
not quite.
Oh no.
Almost.
Sorry.
Yeah, anyway, but yeah, when you come home, we have a great time playing
Absolutely.
Mega Bomberman. We play Warlords. We play. My favorite bad video game is South Park.
It's so
on
bad
the PS1.
and it's so good.
It's like ridiculous trivia combined with really bad arcade pseudo ports.
Incredibly long loading times for really not impressive content.
But man, and you're a trash talker when you play games.
Apparently.
Yeah. Story for another time.
Story for another
Thanks
time.
for watching, guys. Thanks for commenting. Please like the video if you've enjoyed it. Share it on social media. Subscribe to the channel. I'd really appreciate it. Thanks again, Chris, for being on.
Thank you.
We will talk to you guys later. Peace out.